Well, Craig, I want to start with you. We just heard from Jeff Baradelli about the rapidly changing climate. This month, Governor DeSantis signed into law a bill that strikes the mention of climate change from state statutes. Tell us what the bill means. What does this mean?
Well, I think it's a brilliant move because clearly this means that any problems we have, if we just stop talking about them, they'll go away, right? So we need to abolish any mention of property insurance increases and affordable housing, take those out of state law, those problems will be solved as well, right? I mean, it's just such a goofy thing to do to say, you know, we're going to, I think his quote was, we're going to restore sanity and get rid of no longer be obedient to these radical green zealots.
This is what the governor said. The governor said, we're restoring sanity in our approach to energy and rejecting the agenda of the radical green zealots.
Who put that language into the law? Not radical green zealots. His fellow Republicans 20 years ago realized climate change is a serious problem for Florida and we need to do something about it. So these were not, you know, people with long hair and tie-dyed shirts. These were guys in you know, blue blazers and tassel loafers like him. And
this was 2008. It was a unanimous vote by the state legislature. Republicans were in control of the state legislature.
Yeah.
And the governorship.
Yes, so not exactly radical green zealots. I mean, these were hard-headed people who realized we need to do something about this and we need to take action, and now our governor and legislature are basically fossil fuel fools who say anything that hurts fossil fuels, we're against it.
What happens to the climate change goals that were established by the legislature back in 2008?
They've rolled those back. They've gotten rid of them. And so now the Office of Energy, as Emily reported recently, has said we need to repeal all those goals because they don't matter anymore because it's no longer in state law.
Okay, so this new law encourages the burning of more natural gas in the state. The new law eliminates the requirement that the state prioritize energy efficiency when purchasing new vehicles, and it bans windmills from being built off Florida's coastline.
Which is not a problem because we don't have any windmills off our coastline, not now and not ever, because our wind, like our politicians, is too balmy to be reliable. So we're big on solar. We should be big on solar. Windmills, not a problem. So they've solved a problem that doesn't exist and meanwhile decided to ignore one that does.
Craig, you've written recently that sea level rise is causing more and more beach erosion around the state. We have 825 miles of beaches. How expensive has it been to restore the beaches so far?
Every one of these projects costs millions of dollars, tax dollars, federal tax dollars, and the hurricanes and sea level rise are combining to basically wash away the sand almost as quickly as it's put out there. The folks in Jacksonville are getting 10 miles of beach renourishment for, I think it's $32 million, and they just started that project. You know, it's basically just pouring the dollars down the drain.
Where are we getting the sand from?
You know, I was surprised by this. They used to get it from offshore dredging. Now, most of it's coming from the Lake Wales Ridge area of Florida, the ancient dunes from back when most of the state was covered by water.
How's that affecting the Lake Wales Ridge?
That's a real good question. I mean, the Lake Wales Ridge area, they've already lost, I think, about 85% of the habitat for the endangered species that live there because of agriculture and development in that area, and now you've got mining on top of that.
The state has rejected millions in federal funds that could help prepare for future climate change related disasters. Why is the state rejecting the funds that might help us get through a climate related disaster?
Because this is a way to basically serve the people who want them to burn more fossil fuels. Their major campaign donors are the fossil fuel folks, and so they're willing to do anything they can for them. I mean, it's sort of like Trump recently met with the heads of oil companies and said, you give me $1 billion each and I'll roll back any law you want. And that's sort of what's happening in Florida.
This week, the New York Post reported that hundreds of nursing homes in Florida have been forced to shut down over the past 5 years because of soaring costs of commercial property insurance. Is that related to climate change?
Yeah, I mean, you know, climate change doesn't just mean everything gets hotter. Basically, it means we're disrupting our weather patterns. And so we're seeing more and more climate-related disasters in Florida, and that affects property insurance.
Emily, at the same time we're seeing record high temperatures, several of the giant electric utility companies want rate increases. Who wants rate increases in the Tampa Bay area?
Both Duke Energy and Tampa Electric have filed rate hike requests to the state regulators known as the Public Service Commission.
About how high are these? Are these unusually high rate increases, or how would you characterize them?
Yeah, so Duke has asked for $820 million over 3 years, and TECO has asked for $468 million over the next 3 years. Both are saying that it's a necessary increase to help them improve grid infrastructure, including increasing their solar capacity. One thing that's interesting about these requests is they have to file thousands of pages of paperwork to these state regulators. And one of the things in these filings is they have to disclose how much, essentially a percentage of profit for shareholders they're seeking as part of the increases. And both Duke and Tampa Electric's rate of profit is higher than the national average for last year.
So you report that Tampa Electric wants to shift the costs in a way that would benefit some large companies, or benefit large companies.
Yes, so this actually goes back to 2021, the last time Tampa Electric had a rate hike request. And at the end of that case, there was a settlement agreement where Tampa Electric basically signed an agreement with other parties that intervened in that case, and it included some big businesses, including big industrial companies that use a lot of power, Walmart and hospitals. And that agreement said Tampa Electric, next time it asks for a rate hike, will change basically the way it does the math and the way it shifts costs around. So Tampa Electric will be charging the same, or will be collecting the same total amount at the end of the day, but shifting who pays what percentage of that total amount, basically, under this agreement back from 2021. So now here we are, they're requesting it again, and we're seeing the impact of that, where residents will be paying potentially millions more, while big businesses will be saving money compared to what would have happened absent that agreement.
So the costs are being shifted to the residents. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, the Public Service Commission is the group that decides on whether or not these rate increases go through, or how high the rate increases should be. How do you get to be on the Public Service Commission here in the state of Florida?
You're appointed by the governor.
Do we know whether or not the utility companies are donating heavily to the governor, and whether they might have some influence over his appointments?
So the Public Service Commission has come under a lot of criticism. There was a report by a nonpartisan ethics watchdog a few years ago that found that it had essentially been captured by the utility industry, and it has to do with the way that the legislature confirms these appointments, and utility companies donate heavily to lawmakers running for the legislature.
Okay, captured by the utility companies.
Yes.
All right. Hearings are coming up in just a few days. The Duke hearings are going to take place in Largo and Inverness. The Tampa Electric rate increase hearings will take place in Brandon in just a few days. I want to ask you, is it unusual, in the last few years, has it been unusual for the Public Service Commission to go out and ask the public what they think?
Yes, actually, it's been at least 10 years since Duke and Tampa Electric customers have had this kind of opportunity to go to an in-person service hearing about these rate hike requests. And part of that is because of the timing of these. They're usually several years apart, but also the pandemic shut down in-person hearings. They did them only virtually. So it's been many years, like I said, at least a decade since customers have had this kind of opportunity.
I want to ask you about a report that you published on the Times website on Friday, and that is that there's a new survey about what people in Florida think about the environment. What were some of the highlights of this new survey?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating survey. It was commissioned by the Environmental Defense Fund, but done by a Republican polling firm. And they found that when they informed the participants of the survey that 2/3 of Florida's electricity is generated from burning natural gas, which is, one source of energy, and much of that is piped in from out of state. 67% of Republicans said that was concerning. And so the Republican pollster, Ryan Burrell, who has worked for clients like Governor DeSantis, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna in the past, he said that these results were surprising and merited further investigation, basically.
Does it show that maybe Tallahassee's a bit out of step with what the public thinks in Florida?
I think these poll numbers show that people generally they don't want their energy coming from one single source. Energy diversification is popular among people of all parties, and that's sort of the argument that the environmentalists are making on the heels of this.
Craig and Emily, I want to ask you about the story, and Craig, you mentioned earlier that the Washington Post reported just recently. Donald Trump invited oil industry executives to Mar-a-Lago last month and asked them to raise $1 billion for his election campaign, and then Trump then promised to roll back the environmental measures enacted by President Biden. Trump called this a deal. So, Craig, you mentioned this earlier. This is almost unprecedented that we would get a report like this, that somebody would offer favors in exchange for a giant campaign contribution.
It's very clearly a quid pro quo. I mean, and even the story said even the oil people were astonished by how naked the offer was, and but that's sort of where we're at. That the fossil fuel industry realizes they're in great jeopardy, and so politicians who want their money are saying, "You give me some, and I'll do what you want," and they feel like that's what they can do. And it's interesting. There was another Post story that said, the oil industry has actually done really well under the Biden administration. The United States actually is the leading oil producer in the world right now, but in spite of that, they're saying, well, but we're going to back Trump because he's going to back off all the safety measures that the Biden administration has imposed.
Emily, do you have any take on the story, or would you like to stay on the sidelines on this one?
I just think that, it shows that the energy policy and the environment's just becoming increasingly politicized, and I think polls like the one you and I just discussed are an effort to sort of push back on that energy and the environment doesn't have to be political. Oftentimes I think voters don't want it to be as political as it is, but sort of the environment that we're in.